My name is Caroline Walker, and for a long time, I thought my life looked like something out of a magazine. We lived in an old red brick house in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland. Its wide windows caught the morning light just right, and the wooden staircase carried the echo of countless footsteps, each one layering memories on top of the last. To visitors, the house seemed timeless, even comforting. To me, it was a place where I tried to hold on to normalcy, even when I could feel small cracks forming beneath the surface. I still remember those mornings when my daughter, Emily, would press her tiny hands against the glass, pointing at the clouds as if they were her private canvas. She was only 6, full of wonder, and she gave color to even the grayest day. Her imagination poured into everything, and in her laughter, I felt glimpses of hope. But at the same time, there was a weight on my chest that I couldn't quite name. My husband, David, carried himself with the polished confidence of someone who knew how to win people over. He was admired at work, always neatly dressed, and when neighbors stopped by, he had a way of drawing them in with his charm. And yet, at home, there were moments when his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I told myself it was stress, maybe grief. My mother had passed away not long before, leaving me with a hollow ache and an inheritance I never wanted to think about. Losing her made me feel untethered, like part of my anchor had been cut loose. In those quiet moments when the house creaked, when David's voice sounded too careful, when Emily whispered things that made no sense, I felt something stirring beneath the ordinary. It was the kind of unease you push aside, because facing it would mean admitting that the life you built might not be as safe as it looked. I didn't know it then, but the walls I thought protected us were already closing in, and the people I trusted most were about to show me just how fragile that picture-perfect life really was. On the outside, my family looked like the picture of stability. We had the nice house with the trimmed hedges, a husband who dressed sharply for work, and a daughter whose laughter floated through every room. Neighbors would wave and say how lucky I was, how David seemed like the perfect husband, and how Emily had inherited his smile. From the sidewalk, I suppose it really did look like we had it all. But when the front door closed and the curtains were drawn, things felt different. David's charm, the same magnetism that won over clients and colleagues, seemed to fade once he was home. He still moved through the house with confidence, but I noticed how his warmth cooled in private. His compliments turned into silence, his quick smile into something more practiced, more distant. I told myself it was grief, that losing my mother had unsettled us both. Still, his detachment only seemed to deepen after her passing, especially once the matter of her inheritance surfaced. That money, which to me felt like a final gift I could never spend without sorrow, seemed to weigh on him in a way I couldn't quite understand. If David's coolness was quiet, his mother's judgment was anything but. Evelyn had a way of appearing unannounced, stepping into our home as if she still owned a piece of it. To her, nothing I did was quite enough. She looked at me as though I were only borrowing a place in her son's life. When it came to Emily, her affection was conditional, wrapped in comments about how a little girl should act, how she should sit still, speak politely, and behave less like a child. It broke my heart to see my daughter shrink under her grandmother's gaze, her boundless imagination pressed into boxes she was never meant to fit. And yet, Emily was my light. Her innocence and wonder softened the edges of every hard moment. When she described clouds as castles or animals, I saw her world in color, even as mine felt gray. She was the one who reminded me there was joy to hold on to, even when I felt inadequate. even when the walls of that house seemed to echo with judgment and distance. Still, beneath her laughter, I could feel the fractures forming. David's restless eyes, Evelyn's quiet disapproval, the weight of loss I carried alone, they all wove together into something unspoken but heavy. The house looked steady from the street, but inside, there were fault lines no one else could see. I tried to ignore them, but part of me already sensed the truth. What seemed like a perfect family was more fragile than I dared admit. And soon, those hidden fractures would begin to surface in ways I could no longer deny. It started with something so small, I almost brushed it aside. Emily came to me one afternoon with a drawing in her hand, her crayon smudged across the page. She had drawn our old family house, but what caught me off guard was the way she pointed at a figure in the corner. She whispered that Grandma had visited her in a dream and that she told her to be careful. My heart stopped for a moment. My mother had only been gone a few months, and Emily was still so young. I wanted to believe it was just her imagination, a way of keeping a loved one close, but the seriousness in her eyes unsettled me. After that, I began noticing more things. At night, when I thought David was working late or winding down, I sometimes heard him speaking in hushed tones from his study. His voice was low, deliberate, the kind of whisper meant to avoid being overheard. Once, Emily told me she had heard him talking to his mother on the phone, saying I wouldn't notice. I smiled for her sake, tried to tell her that sometimes adults keep things private for work. But deep inside, I felt a knot tightening. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. David was my husband. We had built a life together. Surely, my grief and exhaustion were making me paranoid. But then one night, curiosity, or maybe fear, pulled me toward his study. The door was slightly open, which was unusual. He normally kept it locked. I stepped inside and noticed a drawer left ajar. Inside was a folder marked Life Insurance. My hands trembled as I opened it, and there it was, a policy taken out in my name, signed just a week after my mother's funeral. The amount was far higher than anything I could imagine, and the sole beneficiary was David. My throat closed up as if the walls themselves had turned against me. I tried to rationalize maybe he thought it was a way to protect Emily if something ever happened to me. Maybe this was just his version of responsibility. But the timing, so soon after the inheritance, made my stomach turn cold. I pushed the folder back into place, closed the drawer, and walked out as quietly as I had entered. My pulse wouldn't slow down. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Every creak in the house sounded sharper, every shadow heavier. Emily's words came back to me. Grandma said to be careful. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that my fears were nothing more than grief twisting reality. But somewhere deep inside, I knew better. Something was not right, and I had only begun to scratch the surface of what that truly meant. It was Emily who gave me the first real shiver of dread. One morning, she crawled onto my lap, her little face serious in a way children's faces shouldn't be. She whispered about a dream, about a basement hidden beneath our house, a room meant for hiding when bad people came. My blood ran cold. I had read about an old servant's basement in the property report years ago, but I had never spoken of it to her. How could she have known I tried to laugh it off for her sake? But inside, I felt something tightening, like the air itself had turned against me. That evening, David wheeled his suitcase to the door. He kissed Emily on the forehead. gave me that practiced smile, and said he was off on an important business trip. I nodded, though my stomach clenched. The moment the door shut behind him, I felt the silence of the house shift into something heavier. Not long after, as Emily colored by the window, I saw movement outside. A man in a dark coat was circling our property. He lingered near the garage before moving toward the backyard. My breath caught in my throat. I yanked the curtains closed and pulled Emily close to me. I told her we would stay in for the night, but my hands were trembling. Something wasn't right. When Emily went to bed, she begged to sleep in my room. I agreed, more grateful than ever for her presence beside me. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled me under. Sometime past midnight, a sharp smell woke me. My throat burned. Gasoline. My heart pounded as I stumbled to my feet and rushed downstairs. Every door I tried was locked tight from the outside. Then, with a mechanical groan, heavy shutters slid down over the windows, sealing us in. The sound was metallic, final. Smoke began creeping under the kitchen door, curling black and acrid. My body shook with terror. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her small voice broke through the rising chaos we needed to escape now. When I asked how, she told me her grandmother had shown her the way in a dream behind the pantry. I didn't question it. With smoke thickening, I pulled her toward the kitchen. We pushed aside the bottom shelf, and there it was, a wooden panel I had never noticed before. My fingers clawed at the edges until it creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark passage. I shoved Emily inside first, her little body disappearing into the shadows, then crawled in behind her, pulling the panel shut. The tunnel was suffocating, smelling of earth and age. Cobwebs brushed against our faces, and dust scratched at my throat. I whispered prayers under my breath as we crawled, the heat of the fire chasing us forward. The roar of the flames behind us grew louder, like the house itself was screaming. At last, a faint sliver of light appeared ahead. We pushed through a rusted door, and cold night air rushed over us. I lifted Emily into the yard, her face streaked with ash, but her eyes steady. Behind us, flames devoured our home, orange light twisting into the sky. Sirens wailed in the distance, but I barely heard them. All I could feel was Emily's hand in mine, her small body pressed against me. We had escaped, but as I watched the house collapse into fire, I knew this was only the beginning of a much darker truth. The moment I pulled Emily into that hidden passage, the world above us turned into a nightmare. The roar of fire spread through the house, muffled but unmistakable, as if the walls themselves were groaning in pain. The air was thick with dust, and every breath burned. Cobwebs clung to my face, grit filled my throat, and the tunnel felt like it might close in on us at any second. I crawled forward with one hand on Emily's back, pushing her along, terrified she would falter in the dark. She moved with a calm determination that broke my heart, my little girl, leading me through shadows I couldn't see. Her small voice steady even as flames devoured the life we once knew above our heads. The smell of gasoline was suffocating. It coated the air, stung my eyes, and made my stomach twist. Behind us, beams cracked and splintered, a sound like bones breaking. I imagined the ceiling collapsing, burying us alive before we ever reached the end. My body trembled, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let Emily see me break. The tunnel stretched longer than I thought possible. Each inch forward was agony, my knees scraping against dirt, my palms raw from crawling. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. I whispered prayers, half desperate, half defiant that we would make it, that this wouldn't be the end. At last, a faint glimmer of light appeared ahead. Emily whispered that we were almost there. I clung to her words like a lifeline. The closer we came, the hotter the air grew, as though the fire had found its way into the very earth. But then, with a final shove, I forced open a rusted metal door. Cold night air slammed into us, sharp and glorious. I lifted Emily into the shed, then stumbled out behind her, coughing and gasping as fresh air filled my lungs. For a moment, I just held her, both of us shaking. Then I turned and saw it. Our house, our home was engulfed in flames. Fire tore through the windows, black smoke twisting into the sky. The roof groaned under its own weight before collapsing in a shower of sparks. The sound was deafening, the glow so bright it turned the night into day. Emily tugged at my sleeve, reminding me we couldn't stay there. We ran barefoot across the yard, our clothes smeared with soot, until we reached our neighbor Barbara's porch. I pounded on the door with what little strength I had left. When she opened it, her eyes went wide at the sight of us, ash-covered, trembling, half wild with fear. I begged her to call the police, to call the fire department, to tell them this wasn't an accident. My husband had set the fire. He had tried to kill us. Barbara didn't hesitate. As she grabbed the phone, I collapsed onto her porch steps, clutching Emily to my chest. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. By the time the firefighters arrived, the house was unsalvageable. We watched from across the street as water arced through the night sky. Too late to save what had already been consumed. But the house wasn't the only thing that had burned away. Any illusion of safety, of trust, was gone. As the flames raged, I knew the truth in my bones. This was no tragic accident. It was a plan, a betrayal. And now, nothing would ever be the same again. When the fire was finally under control and the investigation began, I told the police everything. The life insurance policy, the hushed phone calls, the man outside our window. For a moment, I worried they wouldn't believe me, that it would sound like the grief and paranoia of a widow-to-be. But then the evidence started to pile up. Gasoline residue was found across the property, deliberately poured in key places. The security system had been tampered with, programmed to lock us in. My instincts had been right all along. Within a day, David was found at a gas station several towns away. In his trunk were bundles of cash, fake IDs, and a burner phone. When they put him in handcuffs, he shouted that he was innocent, that his mother had forced him into it. Evelyn was arrested soon after. At first, she tried to maintain her elegance, insisting she knew nothing. But when David blamed her directly, her composure shattered. They turned on each other in a way I had never imagined, mother and son clawing to escape responsibility, their devotion rotting into betrayal. The months that followed were heavy with preparation. Investigators traced David's debts, uncovered his failed ventures, even found proof of another relationship he had been hiding. Phone records tied him to Evelyn in the weeks leading up to the fire. The picture became clear. It had never been about love or family. It was about money, control, and the illusion of success. By the time the trial began, the courthouse was packed, reporters lined the hallways. Neighbors whispered in disbelief that the same man they had once admired could be accused of plotting to kill his wife and daughter. I sat on the wooden bench, my hands clasped, Emily beside me swinging her legs nervously. The prosecution laid everything bare: photographs of the tampered security system, testimony from experts confirming the deliberate use of gasoline, the insurance policy naming David as the sole beneficiary. It was damning. But what broke the silence of that courtroom was Emily's voice. She was only 6, yet she walked to the stand with her stuffed rabbit in her arms and a steadiness that made the entire room lean in. She spoke about overhearing her father on the phone, saying that if I were gone, everything would be his. She remembered him mentioning that it should look like an accident. Then, with her innocent certainty, she added that her grandmother, my mother, had warned her in a dream. The jury sat in stunned quiet. It wasn't evidence in the traditional sense, but it was the kind of truth only a child could deliver: clear, fearless, and impossible to ignore. In the end, the verdicts were guilty. David was sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder and arson. Evelyn received 8 years for conspiracy. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like victory. Watching the people who were once my family led away in chains was both a relief and a heartbreak. As I walked out of that courthouse with Emily's hand in mine, I felt the weight of both betrayal and survival. We had lost so much, but we were still standing. And in that moment, I began to understand that our story wasn't just about destruction. It was about what we would build next. 6 months have passed since that night, and life looks very different now. Emily and I live in a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy. But it feels safe, and that's what matters most. The mornings are quieter here. I wake up to the sound of birds instead of alarms. And sometimes, I catch myself standing in the kitchen, just breathing, grateful for the stillness. Safety has become its own kind of luxury. Healing hasn't been easy, but it's been steady. Emily has found comfort in her drawings. Her latest one hangs on the fridge, 3 figures holding hands under a tree, with another figure drawn in soft, glowing colors above us. When I asked her about it, she simply said it was Grandma watching over us. That innocence and faith remind me every day that even in loss, we carry love forward, in honor of my mother. I started a small community project, a foundation that helps single mothers and families rebuild after crisis. It's modest for now, but it's growing. Each time I see another woman walk through those doors and find support, I feel like a piece of my mother's kindness is still alive. There are moments of warmth too, little sparks of companionship. A neighbor often helps with repairs around the house, and though I'm not rushing into anything, his quiet presence has reminded me that life doesn't end with betrayal. It can begin again in unexpected ways. Through all of this, I've learned something I want to leave you with. Family isn't always about blood. It isn't about titles or appearances. Family is the people who choose to protect you, stand beside you, and love you through the fire. If my story has touched you, I hope you'll like, share, and leave a comment below. Tell me what family means to you, because in the end, those bonds of love are what truly keep us alive.